we are starting.
Thank you, Gunsu. I mean, that's me for the ones who are attending for the first time. That's like when I qualified, I'm an engineer and I'm an MBA with about 30 years of experience in various fields in automation. And now I work with getting organizations transformed. I live in Warsaw, Poland. Briefly, thank you. Now, as we said, there are various kinds of thinking. This is just a way of, okay, what's design thinking is the subject which was given. We call it like lateral thinking, we call divergent thinking, there's something called convergent thinking, there's something called out of the box thinking, there's something called critical thinking. Everybody thinks, but we have a very specific way. And as always, humans, instead of just thinking, okay, this is a different way of thinking, correct? Your way of thinking is not like my way of thinking. It's a very often said statement between two people who are open towards communicating. Now, what are these? Now, what do you mean by a design thinking? Of late, in fact, in the last about, I would say, 3 or 4 years, there's one word which has been coined. We love coining new words, right? Does this mean design thinking was never there before? It was there. People were in that mode of thinking too. I mean, but we have coined this word keeping one thing in mind. What was it different from conventional other ways of thinking before? How was it different from, because lateral thinking or divergent thinking or out of the box thinking is also design thinking in a way. Yeah, but they wanted to give a structure. Again, there is a debate. Should there be a structured defined way of design thinking, or should it be treated like a philosophy of thinking? The schools of management are still the best of the schools of management, be it the Harvard, be it whatever. You take the top 10 now, they have a course on something called design thinking in the last 3 years, 4 years. And some have combined it with also called as design thinking and probably innovation, not invention, okay? Innovation. Now, again, we'll come to it. There's a little and a big distinction between innovation and invention. So I'm going to try my best to share what I have understood. And thanks to my understanding on this subject, I expanded about a couple of years back when my daughter said, Papa, there's this course in INSEAD, just talking about innovation and design thinking. What do you think about it? I said, like, okay. So I was aware of this before, and I had a very academical opinion on it. I'm trying to kind of get some practical ways of how we go about understanding this. So is it something like, okay, I'm going to think only convergently, I'm going to think only divergently, I'm going to think only laterally, I'm going to think only critically? No. Any given individual at a given point of time, okay, first of all, why are we thinking? Something we used to like, why do you stop thinking and get to action? But we have to think, isn't it? If you want to have a solution to the problem or the question which is there in front of you, you think. As simple as that. You be an individual, you be an organization, you be a society. I mean, I always keep saying you are a civilization. That is a challenge in front. You want to find a solution, then you got to think. You got to stop probably doing what you're doing and then think about it and move ahead. That's why we think. So, say for example, when you discover something, when you kind of find something for the first time, it's very divergent. When Columbus found an alternate route, nobody ever thought. In the process, he also ended up finding a new zone called, or a horizon called America. He never thought. He did not plan for it. That was completely divergent. But after having found out, then you have to have some convergent thoughts too. Okay, this is the piece of land which I have found. I got to find out a way how I'm going to manage this piece of land as humanity, as a human civilization, for the benefit of people who are kind of there in that place. So then there is convergent thinking. And once again, then I have to kind of make best out of it. There is a divergent thinking. So this convergent thinking and divergent thinking are no one-way roads or not traffics for one form of kind of traffic. You got to keep moving in and moving out of it. It's not something like I'll always be a divergent thinker or I'll always be a convergent thinker. Now, critical thinking. I mean, this is right and this is wrong. Now, yes, there are certain areas. If you have a law, I cannot have any divergent thinking on the law. You got to follow it. You follow, you adhere to it. There is only yes and no. So once it is framed in the constitution, that is the way that society is being managed. So there is no question of any divergent thinking or kind of out of the box thinking to follow that means of law. Yeah, then you have the extreme right wings or you have the extreme wrong wings. So this end feels that is wrong and that end feels this is wrong, or this end feels this is right. Perfect. Divergent thinking, predominantly, we say, is kind of to do with creativity. That's a word which is very often kind of associated with creativity. Like, for example, I had a small talk and yesterday, with my wife and said, like, if you are given the power to do whatever you want to do, what you would want to do? I mean, I'm like, okay. I said I would want the ability of, or rather, making every human being able to go anywhere they want, wherever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and return to whenever they want and however they want and wherever they want. Like, what is this rubbish? I mean, it's rubbish. Divergent thinking conventionally looks rubbish. But yeah, if you're able to move, go where, reach anywhere, like, then you won't be like in the situation like Brian looking for a 3-month visa, 10-day visa, 1-year visa to go to China and then stay there for 10 days and then understand and come back. No. So divergent thinking does not require any kind of, it's not logical thinking. Sometimes could be called as even illogical thinking, but that's the way it is. Okay, now thinking as a process itself, what happens? What happens to us, or what do you mean by this thinking, or based on what we are able to think, right? My ability to think is only based on my experiences in life and what I can see. If I'm blind and if I'm kind of deaf and if I'm kind of dumb, then my experiences and ways of learning and what experience I learned in my life will be very different from somebody else who has all these senses. Perfect. Now, if I had been kind of, I was typically brought up in kind of India and then moved around a few places across the globe. So my way of thinking will probably be also determined by that social environment which I was in at a metacognitive level and the various social environments I was exposed to at various stages of my life. Wonderful. At a conscience level, what I think is completely different. That's purely by the value system which has been built inside me by whatever ways I have built those value systems. Then I have something at purely the cognitive levels. Like somebody asked me, like, how is it in Warsaw now? I said it is 18 degrees Celsius. 4 months back, it was like -4. So there is a lot to do with also how I feel, rather how I feel has also got to do with what's there around me, how I sense, how I see, what I see. Springtime, I kind of see tulips and roses and kind of all beautiful flowers everywhere. So I feel nice. So cognitive level. And depending on that, my brain works, okay, at the visual level, at the motor cortex level. And then I kind of arrive at, and then there is a way in which I think about any given subject. This is the way human being, or it is the way it works with human beings. You like it or not, so all these aspects are there. Good. So now, having seen how we think, having seen various forms of thinking, or there are different kinds of thinking, of which one is also critical thinking. Say, like, what I mean, I'm just trying to look at all the ways of thinking so that we understand what do you mean exactly by the subject what we are today talking about. Critical thinking is purely like, say, for example, at the leadership level. Like if you happen to be the general of an army or the chief of staff of the defense services in a government, you cannot think divergently and convergently, and you don't have different ways to think. You have to think specific to a very specific task, critical. That's it. There's a goal, and that's to protect your boundary. That's to protect the civilization in your boundary, and you do everything which is required to do that. You have nothing else to think about. Or if you happen to kind of be leading, a given situation at the moment, there shouldn't be such happenings, but look at the war situation which is over there and look at what's happening in, wherever there is a war. And if there is a person who's a general of the army, he cannot afford to have any other forms of thinking other than just looking at what the result is for the given situation. Purely, or if you happen to lead an organization to profits, if you're a CEO of a company, your primary purpose is to ensure that you have kind of profits and increase the shareholders' value. That's it. The rest of it is for the rest of it, you do only for that. You do the rest of it, and if you don't do that, then you're not required. So his thinking is predominantly critical. So, putting it all, now what is this design thinking, or why is this off late being spoken about so much? Pretty simple. The rate of change of things is at the highest of human history. Things change, or the number of things that change per second is at a maximum number in human history as of today. which means if you look at, let's say, for example, whatever technologies we are talking about, or whatever product which comes in the market, or whatever solutions are provided, people want a little more. Why? Because the environment is changing, the ways of living is changing, the amount of information which is available with people is changing, thoughts are changing. When everything is changing, then what is required by a consumer is also changing. A customer, consumer, whatever. I mean, what you want now, and if you sit back and think what you wanted 20 years ago, and sit back and think what you wanted when you were a child, enormous amount of change, enormous changes have happened. So when such changes happens very fast, then they said, okay, then we got to find out a way to adapt and innovate everything, whatever we have. Why? Because the people are wanting it in a very different form. Why? Because the culture is changing, their environment is changing, social factors changing, political factors changing, economic factors changing. All these factors seem to be changing very fast. So what people want is also changing very fast. So I got to find a way of coming up with something innovative and something different every given time, right? No wonder why Apple is a success and so is Microsoft is not as successful as what Apple is. Because Apple kept on innovating, Apple kept on changing. They kept on finding out, okay, what do the people want? What do people want? They wanted something more. They want something more. So the essence of design thinking, if you ask me, emotionally speaking, is the word empathy. Another way of putting it is understanding what the market wants and what people want and what consumer wants. You got to understand. You got to understand what is required. And then you explore, which is basically expansive thinking or ideation. Then you kind of, sit and talk to people, or you kind of, within the team, the subject matter expertise is kind of called in for, and then you work on the various options which you can think of. Then you put it on an experiment or test. You know, you have to do that for anything which it could be a thought, it could be a service, it could be a product. Then you kind of look at, test it, you experiment it, works well, you implement it, but doesn't empathize there, or it doesn't kind of ends over there. If you ask me, once again, it get back to a cycle. Why? Because change is constant and continuously something is changing. So you got to keep on doing this. Right from the aspect of, have you heard of when probably, 20 years back, if you said a chair is a chair. Now we are talking of ergonomically designed chair. If you're working for 8 hours and if you're working for 12 hours, you have a very specifically designed chair to keep your spine and back in a very specific position. You have to innovate. It's the same chair, but you got to find out ways to kind of move on. So design thinking can be applied for any product, any solution, any service, primarily with this in mind, understanding the needs of, or understanding the changing needs of the users and the consumers better. And that consumer and user could be a baby, could be an old individual, it could be a senior citizen, it could be kind of someone who's challenged, or it could be normal human beings, whatever. So with this, now I said a word in between. I said most of the people have design thinking and innovation together. We don't talk about the word invention, because if you look at from 13th century, or for that matter 8th century, this gives kind of the major invention till 20th century. Honestly, there has been no major inventions in the 21st century per se. There has been no major, but there had been innovations. To me, the only distinction between the two is application of the existing technology in a very different way for a very different result. It's not a new technology by itself. So every time when you say innovate, it's not a new technology per se, it is a new innovative way of using an existing technology. So it's a time for innovation. So it's a time for design thinking. Yes, probably in between we might, do we have it in us to invent something? That's why some people say, no, there is nothing left in the earth, and probably I'm either going to the Mars or I'm going to go to deep sea. These are the only two places where something is left out for us to be kind of inventing or finding out new. So anything to do with innovating, and in particularly business environment, we are left with no choice but to kind of innovate in the way which we have, and there's no invention. It's the same old thing. You can't invent a different meaning for business. You have to make money, and that's about it. Can you kind of find a different thing? No. The economy revolves around materialistically, and in the success of businesses and civilizations or countries or governments economically. Can you change it? I'm not sure you can. So everything is then based on then what? You cannot invent anything newly until and unless you suddenly wipe out materialistic needs of thing and we become all like, okay, our success is going to be like whose spirituality is more high and which country has, I don't know when that will happen. If that happens, maybe then there is something newly which gets invented. But until then, we just keep innovating with the way which we work. And if you want to do that, having a structure to do it or one way of doing it is design thinking. That's all I had to say. However, let me just add one more thing into whenever we talk about design thinking or every time we talk about lateral thinking, there is something which is called create. You guys are not creative. I want people to be creative. But be aware, the same organization you go with something creative, they're going to come back and tell you, kid, this shit is not going to work. You have to be really, really, really careful. Organizations telling you that we want you to be creative and organizations meaning that there's a lot of difference because no organization is going to tell you be creative and I'm okay if I'm not going to make money off it. So are you going to use, does creativity result into eventually economical success? Yes, if it does, and if you happen to be working in such industries, brilliant. Expand your creativity. Everybody has a creative part of the brain too, and everybody has a logical part of the brain too. Everybody has a divergent part of the brain too, but depends on how much of it you have utilized. Like for example, engineers and doctors, we are very structured. This is the way it has to be. This is the input. This is the output. This is the result. This is the logic. And this is how it works. These are all your symptoms. This is the disease. This is the medicine. Everything is, you cannot say, oh my God, I'm going to try something new and then you need to have a clinical trial for it. You can't do that. You can't find out a new medicine and try it out on a patient and think, no way, no creativity is allowed. You cannot say I'm going to join two other nerves and then find out a new way of how a human body is responding. Impossible. You can't. So some professions does not permit you. Likewise, if you happen to be a finance person, there is no room for creativity for a finance person, right? One is a one, zero is a 0, 0.01, 0.05. It has to be there. I can't say, okay, I will round it off to point one. Nope, not allowed. How do you round it off? So what profession you are in, what you are, what are you as an individual? And sometimes, like it or not, the kind of profession we happen to exist in for a long period of time makes you as an individual also like that. If you happen to be a kind of a project manager for 20, 25 years in life and suddenly somebody comes out and tell you think like an artist, no way. It's not happening. Or someone who has been into creating music albums and you ask that person suddenly to come and tell, okay, you know what, you find out a solution for this problem, he's not going to be able to do that because he's been using his creative part of the brain to find out what kind of sounds good, what rhythm, what instruments, and suddenly you tell him, no, you work in a small box. Anyway, stop thinking, enjoy the evening. That's all I had to say. Take care, and thanks, Gunsu, once again.